Thank you for joining to watch today's video presentation. My name is Selena Edie Dillon, and I'm the Director of Program Operations at Education Analytics, or EA. In this video, I will be presenting What Are We Missing? The Impact of COVID-19 on Educational Data Quality and Availability. Our goal of this video presentation is to delve into the impact of COVID-19 on education data quality and availability, and to share what EA has learned from working with our partners to address these missing data issues. Our hope is that viewers can learn about our approach for assessing trade-offs and implications, using a case study with our partners at core districts, so that you can apply our learnings to your own context. Before we jump in, a little bit about our organization. Education Analytics, or EA, is a nonprofit based in Madison, Wisconsin that employs researchers, analysts, policy strategists, and education experts from all over the country. We work with more than 70 partners across 28 states to conduct education research and develop rigorous analytics using educational data in order to support actionable solutions and continuous improvement in our schools. Over the past year, as our partners have been unpacking how COVID-19 has impacted their data-driven decision-making, our extensive experience with data warehousing, modeling, and reporting has allowed EA to collaboratively support these efforts. So when we say COVID-19 impacted data, what do we really mean? As most viewers already know, due to the impact of COVID-19, state and district leaders have had to make tough policy decisions around closing schools and implementing a moratorium on standardized assessments. These decisions have led to many questions about data quality, including, how do we collect attendance data absent in-person schooling? And what is the effect on measures of chronic absenteeism? And in the absence of state tests, how might we understand student learning during this time? How does the lack of test data interact with year-over-year growth measures? And as our partners have stepped back to think about how COVID has impacted our students in their learning, a common question has continually surfaced. What academic metrics are still possible to calculate? And how do we determine what we can and cannot responsibly report out to stakeholders? And as EA began working with our partners to try to answer that question, what can we responsibly measure and report? We realized that missing and incomplete data impacts several different components of our work. First, from a data engineering perspective, we need to understand how our standard business rules and file processing practices are impacted by data quality. Second, from a metric modeling perspective, we need to investigate whether the metrics mean the same thing they did previously, and if we need to interpret results with caution. Third, we need to consider what and how we responsibly report metrics using impacted data, and how we message the limitations of these metrics to teachers, parents, and other education stakeholders. And finally, across all of these components, we need to discuss and clarify use. How will this data be used? What are the stakes attached to this use? And the answers to these questions may inform the decisions we make about business rules, modeling, and reporting. Our approach to understanding missing data impacts was to bring these questions around data processing, methodology, and reporting into a systematic review of every EA project. Through this work, we identified some key questions to ask of every project in order to understand data quality and impact. We documented this process and our approach in a missing data guide that we are making available with this presentation so that other stakeholders can use it as a resource in your work with COVID-19 impacted data analytics. These are just a few examples of the type of metrics and reporting adjustments that we needed to make across our projects. In some cases, we saw the need for business rule changes to adapt to schools' unique grading practices during 2019-20. For example, we saw that more grades were reported as pass and no pass in spring 2020 in the state of California, in part due to the University of California's decision to suspend its cap on pass-no pass for high school units completed in spring 2020 due to COVID-19. For some partners, metrics were dependent on a fixed number of days in the school year and thus needed to be adjusted. For example, to be classified as a free and reduced price lunch program participant, a student must be enrolled in the program for a certain number of days. For 2019-20, that enrollment quota needed to be adjusted to account for limited in-school attendance that year. Additionally, some reports and dashboards had to be redesigned or appended to acknowledge the missing testing and growth data. Across all of our partnerships, we saw a great value in having these conversations about data quality impacts that might not be immediately obvious and yet yield major implications for metric interpretability and use. To provide a more explicit example of these missing data considerations, the rest of our presentation will focus on a case study of how we worked with our partner, CORE, to make adjustments to an impacted metric on their externally facing dashboard. EA has worked with CORE districts, a group of 200 local education agencies, or LEAs, across the state of California, for more than 7 years. One of CORE's key offerings to its data collaborative members is access to a user-facing dashboard that reports on a range of metrics, including achievement, academic growth, graduation, chronic absenteeism, EL redesignation, social-emotional learning data, and climate survey data. To support this dashboard, which houses data for about 4 million students across those 200 LEAs, EA operates an automated data system that loads, cleans, organizes, calculates, analyzes, and reports these metrics. Given that one of EA's highest priorities is to ensure the quality of data that populates the dashboard, EA worked very carefully with CORE to review and diagnose data quality issues due to the impact of COVID-19 on the data. Today, we will focus on CORE and EA's approach to unpacking the COVID-19 data impacts on the chronic absenteeism metric. The California Department of Education, or CDE, defines chronic absenteeism as a student being absent for at least 10% of the instructional days in which they were enrolled at the school. Research shows that students who are chronically absent are more likely to lack reading skills, have lower test scores, and are in higher jeopardy of not graduating. So this is an important metric for the CORE dashboard to report and for the CORE Data Collaborative members to track. In order to understand how COVID impacted the CORE chronic absenteeism metric for the 2019-20 school year, we focused on 3 major domains of review: data quality and metric calculations, research and methodology decisions, and the front-end visualizations of chronic absenteeism on the CORE dashboard. Today's case study will walk through each of these domains in more detail. First, we will focus on how we addressed data quality and metric calculations for chronic absenteeism. In a typical school year, we calculate chronic absenteeism using the attendance file that is uploaded to the CORE data system at the end of the school year by the CORE Data Collaborative members. After performing quality control checks on attendance data for 2019-20, we learned that most districts reported attendance only through mid-March, around 120 total days enrolled, while a subset of districts reported attendance data through the end of the school year, around 180 days enrolled. This prevalence of partial year data is likely due to the CDE's guidance that attendance data for 2019-20 needed to be reported through February 29th, but no later, in order to meet the state's requirement for reporting average daily attendance. To address this flag, we dove into the correlation between partial year and full year chronic absenteeism rates. In the next section, we will discuss our findings. Our investigation into the business rule for chronic absenteeism also yielded some other findings. While the end date for calculating chronic absenteeism is sourced directly from the attendance file, we also use additional data sources to calculate a continuous enrollment measure that links the metrics on the dashboard to student demographics. This allows us to report chronic absenteeism by student group. Typically, continuous enrollment is measured using the fall census date and the test date in the test file. After reviewing the business rules and file sources for calculating continuous enrollment, we recognize that we would not have a Smarter Balance test file this year, given the moratorium on assessment administration due to COVID-19, and determined that we would need a new source of truth for the end date. To address this concern, we set the cutoff date for the end of 2019-20 school year to be the last day of in-school instruction as defined by the CDE, which was February 29th, 2020. To also support the Core Data Collaborative members' own investigation of their data, we produced district-facing data quality reports that show data quality checks and trends during the COVID-19 year. To support your own team's review of the data, here are a list of questions you might ask about data quality and metric calculations. First, data and metric overview questions like, what are all of the source files you expect to be missing or incomplete? Second, data quality and data equity checks like, are certain data limitations specific to certain student groups? Third, zooming out to look at year-over-year comparisons and asking, are there anomalies in year-over-year rates? Please note that all of these questions and more are included in the EA Missing Data Guide for your use. Next, our team focused on potential research and methodology changes for chronic absenteeism. For every metric on the core dashboard, different levels of methodology review were required, based on both the complexity of the metric and the data sources that were impacted. For example, in the case of our academic measures, achievement and growth, we knew that they could not be calculated using our normal year business rules due to the lack of assessment data for spring 2020. For partners that use growth measures, our team has identified two different options for replacing those metrics. The first is to predict missing assessment outcomes, which requires multiple strong methodological assumptions and sets of simulations to verify them. Or to measure growth over a 2-year period, from the school year 2018-19 to the school year 2020-21, skipping the missing data year of 2019-20. In the case of the core dashboard, the teams decided to support the 2-year growth option, given the technical complexity of the first option and the state's policy decision to waive mandated tests in 2019-20. In the case of chronic absenteeism, however, we could report the metric using partial attendance data. So our goal was to understand whether the chronic absenteeism outcomes should be interpreted with caution due to the COVID-19 year impact on attendance data. In order to unpack this, our next step was to compare chronic absenteeism rates from previous years to the 2019-2020 impacted year. We found that measure rates for chronic absenteeism were well correlated between the 18-19 and 19-20 school years across the data collaborative. However, it is important to note that for a subset of schools, the 2019-20 data was not a good proxy for the full year data. This slide provides a visual of the results of our analysis. The plot on the left shows a correlation in chronic absenteeism across 2 full years of attendance data. The 2017-18 school year, shown on the x-axis, and the 2018-19 school year, shown on the y-axis. The plot on the right shows a correlation of chronic absenteeism across a full year of attendance data from the 2018-19 school year, shown on the x-axis, and the 2019-2020 COVID impacted year, shown on the y-axis. As you can see in the plots, the results demonstrate a strong year-over-year correlation of the metric, even with the limited attendance data in 2019-20. However, when we look at the data at a school level, we do see a case of some outliers. In this example, School B reported a chronic absence rate of 59.3% in 2018-19, but a 0% chronic absence rate in 2019-20. This is an example of some unique cases where the 2019-2020 school level chronic absenteeism metric may have not been a strong proxy for full year data and should be interpreted with some caution. After reviewing these outcomes, the teams also considered the use of the chronic absenteeism metric. Because the CDE suspended accountability usage of the state dashboard, this data would not be used by districts for high-stakes decision-making, but rather it would help them understand their school and district chronic absenteeism patterns during the COVID-19 impacted year. Given this context and the well-correlated year-over-year findings, the EA and core teams decided to report the chronic absenteeism metric for the 2019-20 school year. To support your own team's review of data, here are a list of questions you might ask about research and methodology. How do we address the absence of missing standardized test data? What is the extent to which limited 2019-20 data is comparable to typical full-year data coverage? What is the extent to which the metrics using partial year data have different interpretations? As a reminder, these questions and others are included in our missing data guide. Finally, our team also considered the front-end visualization and reporting implications for the chronic absenteeism metric. As we shared at the beginning of this case study, the core dashboard reports on a range of annual metrics at the district and student level and disaggregates that data by student groups. Due to the impact of limited and missing data over the 2019-20 school year, our teams had to review all of the metrics typically displayed on the dashboard to determine whether it was responsible to show, hide, or annotate the metrics in order to be transparent to users about any limitations to interpretability. For example, in the case of our academic metrics, in a typical year, like 2016-2017, we would report results over 2 years and also report the change in index level between those years. For the 2019-2020 school year, however, due to the lack of standardized assessment data, we did not report 2019-20 results and thus could not report change in metric performance or index level across those years. In the case of chronic absenteeism, as we previously discussed, the teams decided to report the metric for 2019-20 after technical and methodological review. To ensure that the data was reported responsibly given its limitations, the teams decided to add an annotation to the chronic absenteeism metric, as well as to other affected metrics, that clarified the business rules for the COVID-impacted year. As you can see here, the chronic absenteeism metric is displayed with an asterisk, and when you hover over the metric, a tooltip appears that clarifies the measure. Along with including these new tooltips, the teams also decided, in some cases, to completely hide the front-end view of pages with missing data, and in other spaces to denote no data, as we saw in the dashboard screenshot showing the 2019-20 achievement data. For 2019-20, metrics on the dashboard were limited to enrollment, high school graduation and A to G completion, attendance, student behavior, and social emotional learning and culture climate data. Given the absence of academic metrics for 2019-20, EA also worked with the core team to support transparent communication with dashboard users and core data collaborative members. The core team provided a guidance document that summarized the business rule changes to the dashboard due to COVID-19 and hosted that document on the core website. Additionally, our team gave data collaborative members access to the Rally Analytics platform, a separate tool that LEAs can use to understand learning lag and recovery. We also provided the core data collaborative members with supplemental data quality reporting in order to better understand what data they could responsibly use for their own COVID-19 recovery efforts. To support your own team's review of data, here are a list of questions you might ask about front-end reporting. What type of visualization is currently being displayed on the relevant dashboard? Is the missing data set within a historical context of other data, or is it independent? How is the missing data interpreted between the front-end dashboard and the back-end database? Is there a flag available within the data identifying zero or missing data, or is the data just omitted? These questions are also included in the front-end visualization section of our missing data guide. Looking ahead, what's next? While this presentation has covered our approach to the 2019-20 school year, we recognize that there is more work to do to unpack the implications of COVID policy on the 2020-2021 school year and beyond. We recognize that our partners will continue to be required to make new business rule and policy decisions in order to account for the lasting impacts of COVID-19 on data availability and data quality. We also know that district leaders need to be able to measure and understand where students are as they re-enter schools, both academically and socio-emotionally, in order to implement interventions that can successfully address learning recovery and acceleration. As an organization in this space, EA is committed to exploring innovative approaches to serve the data and analytics needs of our partners and their students, as well as to share what we have learned with the broader education field as we all collectively emerge from the pandemic. Thank you for spending your time with me to learn a little more about EA's work to support education stakeholders as they make use of the 2019-2020 school year data. If you are interested in connecting on this work, please do not hesitate to reach out. Thank you.